I think right? Are you
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And then make yourself
Like the main one. The main one. Sorry, I'll just go on here. How do I do that? Make. What is it? Is it pen? Pen? Make. Oh, wait. Oh. Yeah, I'm just speaker. Maybe because. Oh yeah, because you'll be going. I hope so. Yeah. See, because look, this person. Pen? Is that pen for everyone though? Yes. I hope so. I think so. I think you should be pinned. Honestly, only they could always pin us. It's not that. That's because it's recording. But yeah, if it's right. Okay.
No, that's so very fine. I think it's like 10 seconds of like giving yeah. I'll tell you the good things in the intro. But I feel like that's like twice now. Welcome to the SURG CRC Spring 2025 Research Symposium. So excited to have you all here. Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. And just some introductions. We're both the co-presidents for SURG. My name's Chelsea and I'm Nicole. Yes. Okay. So we could get started with what is SURG. So we were founded in 2020. And we stand for Sustainable Development Goals, Undergraduate Research Group. And our research is local cross-cutting issues, empowering undergraduates, especially since we know that a lot of opportunities on campus and difficult to get into. We want to have that opportunity open for a lot of our undergraduates, and just promoting accessibility for research. So we are student-led and a collaborative research that tackles on areas UN SDLEs. So, and then at the end of the semester, every semester, we present our semesterly symposium each. You guys are looking today for, so yeah, and then I can pass it on to Nicole.
Awesome. So a little bit more on our club this semester. We have 30 student researchers, which I think is one of the most we've ever had before. We have 4 research committees, which I'll introduce to you soon. And all of our research committees follow the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. As I mentioned before, this is a collaboration with the Berkeley Cannabis Research Center. We are so happy to have their undergraduate students presenting with us today. And we'll present the CRC.
CRC role.
Everyone. Okay, are we introducing the CRC? Is that what we're doing? Okay, Seth, come here. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Peng.
Seth Rosa, hi, I'm a graduate student.
Yeah, and with the CRC, I'm the communications and administrative specialist. I'm also a project manager for the Montegreen Diasporas Project. And so we're super excited and thankful for the SURG group to let us collaborate and join you all this evening for your research symposium and invite our research assistants too. And I know we have some overlap, and so that's even more exciting. And so the Cannabis Research Center is on campus and virtual. Hopefully we have a few folks joining us online as well. But we are at the intersection of community, justice, ecology, and cannabis marijuana policy, of course. And so you'll see from a few of our presentations that our students are going to lead today, as well as some kind of SURG researchers too. What we're doing, what we're about, but also just think through, or just know that the Cannabis Research Center or the CRC is an on-campus and virtual research opportunity for you all as well as students, okay? And I just, want to say I kind of started when the CRC was just a baby. I graduated here in 2019 as an undergrad, and so I was doing GIS work with Van Butzik, who's no longer here, but And I'm super excited to kind of come full circle, be a part of the CRC again, and to support undergraduate students like yourself. So I don't know, give yourselves a round of applause for being here.
Just a big thank you on behalf of the research teams at the CRC. I've been doing research with Cannabis Research Center for 4 years now. And every semester we have undergraduate research assistants, SPUR students, UREP students, and it just kind of enriches the projects. It helps us get everything done. It hopefully helps you guys like add to your CV and add to your resumes, and to your research experience. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the help that you've given us over the years.
Yeah, so that's the CRC. I think we're gonna start, with some of our projects. We're gonna go project by project, and so I believe the slide's advancing. Yeah, so the first project is actually the Longer Grand Diasporas project. And so we have Camille and Tim who will present on this project, and then after every project for CRC folks, we're just gonna get a quick photo of like the whole project team, if that's okay, and use everybody else's time. So thank you for the grace and the patience. All yours.
Hello everyone, my name is Henry and this is Tim. We're two URAP students that worked on the Mulberry Diasporas and Cannabis project. And basically this project looked at the use of cannabis among the young diaspora in California. And specifically its medicinal use, the link with criminal justice and the farm structure in both licensed and unlicensed farm structures. And basically the project was composed of Jackie, Azar, Wendy, Jess, Tim, and
So in recent years, Hmong farmers have become central in debates about cannabis cultivation. There are many controversies that have occurred, especially in northern parts of California, where Hmong farmers are prominent. And also across the US, the Cannabis Research Center has expanded a bit into looking into other crops, such as ginseng and poultry farming on Hmong farmers in particular. So the research project builds upon over 6 years of trust and relationship building with Hmong farmers, many of whom are cannabis cultivators. And 4 themes are explored in the overall research project. So the first one is Hmong medicinal cannabis uses, cultivation practices, and traditional ethnobotanical and medicinal plant histories. So Hmong farmers have been historically known to use different types of crops medicinally. So back in Southeast Asia, opium was prominent in Southeast Asia, where Hmong farmers grew them a lot. And so they look a lot into how crops are used in many different ways. The second theme explored is Hmong farmers' migration to diasporas. So a lot of them hear about economic opportunities through agriculture, and so they move across the US from in areas like North Carolina, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, and California. And the third theme explored are Hmong interactions with criminal justice system. So especially in Siskiyou County, there have been many controversies with water use, and many regulations have been targeted towards Hmong people. And so the sheriff's office has had a lot of issues with Hmong farmers in Northern California. And the fourth theme explored is capital labor dynamics of Hmong cannabis farms.
yeah. So this project involved both ethnographic and participative research. And as we've said before, we focus mainly on Hmong diaspora in California, but because this is a population that has a lot to do with mobility intra and US, we've also looked at other places such as Minnesota, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. And in terms of project, we had a wide variety of different tasks that we could have participated in. So some of them were in-depth interviews and photo voices, but also the cleaning of those interview transcripts, the translation and interpretation of those interviews, the creation of discourse timelines. So basically put in order all the different parts of those interviews. And also the development of various story maps from these life's histories. So for example, in my case, I got to listen to the interview of a migrant from Laos that settled in Siskiyou County and basically clean the transcript and then create the discourse timeline and finally the history narrative.
So for me, in my case, I did translation, interpretation of one transcript this semester, but I've also done previous semesters other transcripts. So I've been like translating all and trying to interpret it. And then I also work closely with Mark who's not here, to develop narratives and story maps from life histories. So I've been working closely with her to create a story map on Siskiyou County, since that's been a very thorough research area for this project. And just kind of create a timeline of from the beginning when cannabis cultivation became legal to now where there's many like lawsuits and issues that are occurring in the county itself. And so some key takeaways that the project team has received from this project is the first one is depicting a learning perspective from all people post-refugee resettlement. So like for me, this is a very special one for me since I come from a Hmong background. So it's really nice to hear how adaptations, there are many different adaptations of Hmong people after moving to the US. And the second one is deriving motivation from the life experiences and struggles of tenacious individuals. So a lot of people, you hear them relive their traumas and hear their stories after the war in Southeast Asia and facing lots of persecution. So it's really special to be able to hear these stories and derive motivation. And then the third one is strong research experience in developing literature review skills. So it's pretty straightforward. A lot of this is we actually look through many different literatures because Hmong people are not talked about a lot, and so they're a very underrepresented group. As explained in the fourth point is it's an opportunity to learn about the culture of an underrepresented group, and it's very special for me.
Yeah, well, I knew very little on the Hmong population before starting this project, and listening and hearing about the stories of individuals was really captivating, really interesting, and well, it pushed me to do more research on this topic, and eventually it also led me to an internship this summer in France related to migration from Southeast Asia to France. So yeah, it really opened my scope of interest in terms of research.
And then the last one is very close to me. It helped me develop a closer connection to Hmong culture and language. Coming to Berkeley, I felt a sort of a disconnect between what I was doing and who I was. And so seeing this research opportunity was like amazing for me. It helped me it opened my eyes and showed me that I can incorporate a bit of myself and who I am to my career choices in life. And so it's just been amazing. Also hearing my language, like coming here and being separated from family, it really like makes you go home. This is really nice.
You get them on the green diaspora. Up here really quick, please and thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, and thanks, y'all. Well, you want to be in the
You want to be in?
Nope. Damn. Okay, 1, 2, 3, big smile. Perfect. Okay. And we have for our next research project, yeah, we have the Monopoly project. So if you are presenting on this one, come up, do your thing.
With Michael and the head of the CRC on a project about monopolies. So the official project name is Cannabis Research, investment operating pressures and anti-competitive characteristics. My name is Maddie and I am from SURG.
I'm Iris and I am from Florida.
I'm Gina and I'm also from SURG.
So from project overview, in addition to studying the anti-competitive and monopolistic practices, we also looked at the investment patterns and ownership at different levels. For example, state level, national level, and international levels of cannabis. We also looked at current policies that affect preventing anti-competitive behaviors in small businesses. And we did this through a top-down socioeconomic network analysis of statewide investment patterns and bottoms-up demography of investor-operated relations. So here are the other undergrad researchers on our team. Some of us are from URA and some of us are from SURG.
These are some of the different assignments we've been working on. The first one was done by Bruno. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us today, but I'll be going over that for him. But essentially, he worked on something called the smallholder/corporate agriculture and socio-environmental benefits and deficits. So this was essentially a review of available literature regarding and meta studies on smallholder and corporate agriculture. With that, he's creating an annotated bibliography that also goes with a summary of the literatures that he looked at and also some of the literatures that I looked at. And he was also, his goal is to understand the relevance to issues of socioeconomic inequality, community structures, rural development, and environmental sustainability.
And I worked on assignment 5, which is state comparisons, market development, saturation dynamics, policy discourse, and as well types of market policy models across states. So what I did was look at sort of like journalistic and scientific literature across the recreational cannabis market in the 22 states that have legalized recreational cannabis. And I used that literature to create a timeline of the cannabis market development within every single state. And we're currently working on a sort of executive summary on market trends and market dynamics from the start of the market to where the market is now. And this is the following like hypothesis of this research is that every state has a moment of significant market entry. So a lot of firms come into the market at one time. This is usually when the market like opens up and starts. And then people compete to get licenses and market share. Second thing that happens is a moment of oversaturation in the market. Where like firms begin to fail. So we see a lot of product, prices of a product go down. And then we also have a lot of firms, a lot of licenses. And after this project, we have a crash in prices and a massive firm failure that resets the market down to a sustainable or rational level of operation. And this involves a lot of mergers and acquisitions in which large shareholders buy up smaller businesses as they're exiting the market. And we figured out that this hypothesis is correct. Most of the states, there were only about 3 or 4 that didn't follow this framework, and so we're just working on that executive summary now.
Hello everyone, my name is Bruno. I was in charge of assignment 6, the project findings public summary sheet for the report transformation of unregulated cannabis cultivation under Proposition 64. So first was the policy context, then the methods, key findings were the barriers to licensure, punitive policies, wealth transfer away from cultivators, overproduction, cultivator marginalization, and licensed market dependency on the unlicensed market. The policy recommendations with the other key focus, reform enforcement, addressing the fallout from the price crash, widening the licensure pathways, establishing guardrails on local controls to protect personal cultivation, and creating more consistent policies to stabilize markets and prices. Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Bruno. I was in charge.
So these are also some of Bruno's work. So he reviewed some articles, he did research on high energy use places, and he also compiled the address of these places. One key finding that Bruno had was that Evan Mills estimated that cannabis cultivation accounted for 1% of the total electricity consumption in the United States.
So these are other assignments that we were assigned. One of them that I did was assignment 7, which essentially is a summary report of the ECC data dashboard, the visuals, and there's a narrative description that goes with all these within this project. So essentially, I was doing a graphical analysis of trends based on harvest sales. And that I was looking at that from years from 2020 to 2024, I believe, from different counties. It was like Mendocino, Humboldt, but then there was like all different counties varying. I did data with that and saw like categorized everything based on harvest sales, where it was like the lowest peaks, where it was the highest peaks, and differing between that. I also was looking at the trends in license types, so that was subcategorized by if it was an annual, if it wasn't annual, if it was indoor, outdoor, mix. So it depended on the category that it fell under. But with license, there was also trends within sales, again, with these similar categories, and there was very different findings for the different companies.
And then some of our team members also looked at the relationship between real estate and cannabis, because cannabis farming requires land, and some real estate firms took it as an opportunity to buy up a lot of land. So we looked at like big factors in the real estate industry, and also like tried to look at any like monopolistic practices. And we also looked at the potential benefits that they provide to cannabis related businesses looking to acquire real estate. And some of our team members also looked at like potential financing of cannabis industry. So they looked at serviceability of banks, credit unions, private debt funds. And we also looked at like the regulatory landscape of the financing for the industry.
So some of our, this is some other stuff that our other research assistants have worked on. So one of them was a map of California cannabis supply and supply chain and value chain. So this was done by Netra. She created data visualization of the cannabis market by mapping nodes within the supply chain and state-by-state market summaries to compare outside trends with California. And this project was intended to demonstrate the bigger picture of legalization, investment, mergers and acquisitions, and sales patterns within the cannabis industry. We also had someone who was working on the sort of like fundamental debates within monopolies and studying monopolies and anti-competitive practices. So they were looking at the historical development of the antitrust laws in the US and specific cases that shape the definition of what is anti-competitive. And under antitrust laws, they looked at criticism of prior antitrust policies and current debates and recent shifts in thinking about market.
Anybody else with the team? Good. Yeah, let me get a photo of you all. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Great. Okay. And then the next piece of the project is the geographies one.
I'd like to say a couple words.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, cannabis policy geographies. This project has been going for 2 years now. It's funded by the DCC, and we're looking at factors that influence unlicensed production, cannabis production across California. Many of you have worked on this project already, so sorry if you already know, but basically, California is a unique test case where we have 58 counties for this one state. It's a state law, right? Prop 64 passed for the entire state, and yet each county really administers this law totally differently. So this kind of creates this kind of natural experiment where we can look at each county and think about what policy factors, enforcement strategies, environmental law, that kind of thing, influences actual on the ground decision making. So if you wouldn't mind, thank you. Okay. Kind of what I just said a little bit, except what we did was we worked with public energy data to think about indoor cultivation, looking at energy signatures. We used a data set available from the Water Board called Cannavision from their remote sensing platform that looks at cannabis cultivation from aerial imagery, name imagery. And lastly, we did qualitative research. We went into the counties, 8 specific counties in greater detail with like a qualitative research team and basically interviewed everyone from like the sheriff's department to county planners to grow store owners and cultivators, legal and unlicensed cultivators. So really try to get a holistic sense of what was going on the ground, as well as literally like a bird's eye view with aerial imagery and kind of using big data sets from collaborative partnerships with public considered agencies. So I have a couple people that are going to talk about the work that they did this semester, but just roughly, I'll talk briefly about CBAT, which was the platform that students use to work with the water board's Cannavision output. And basically CBAT, people have described it kind of like a boring video game. And you know, it pops up and you get these images, and basically you get pretty adept at looking at aerial imagery and kind of understanding what you're seeing from a kind of a geospatial standpoint. Students basically annotated or made corrections to the computer model that were then sent back to the water board to correct and enhance that model, so it basically trains it to become better and better at. I can do that too, I'm sorry. The energy signature portion of the project. This is a graph of energy use across a number of days for like indoor cultivation and unlicensed cultivation. And you can see on the y-axis, it's quite a bit of kilowatt hours. Normal like household use might be 30 or 50 kilowatt hours. This is like upwards of 200. And you can see this really distinct pattern of peaks and troughs from basically the necessity of how one would have to grow cannabis or most vegetative things, right? That you have to have a certain life cycle, 18 hours of vegetative life, maybe 12 when it's flowering. And so we were able to actually query this big data set and look at public utility records and try to kind of determine who was a cannabis cultivator out of like a broad data set from PG data. We're still actually in the process of querying data from SoCal Edison and San Diego Gas and Electric. So hopefully with those three big public utilities, we'll get a pretty good sense, or at least an estimate of indoor production in the state. And lastly, so many of you work with Joanna Hasek, who is at the Berkeley Law, and she ran the qualitative portion of this project. And basically, many students kind of worked on like policy briefs, looking at different counties, demographic information, environmental law, and basically compiling all of that. Much of that data is going into our final reports that we're kind of drafting right now that are all going to go back to the DCC. So yeah, hugely helpful, all the work that we've gotten from undergraduate researchers on this project. The CBAT team, for those of you that are here, do you want to do pictures thing? Is that okay? Can we do a picture for the for teams? Mia, I know Mia's here. Iroha's here. Yeah, do you guys want to come up? Those of you that are on the CBAT team, come on up. We'll do the picture. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. That's it for this. Yeah,
Okay, all right, get close. Make it look like y'all like each other. I'm kidding. Okay, just kidding.
Oh, okay.
All right, 1, 2, 3, big smiles. Great, wonderful, beautiful. Okay.
And we maybe everybody looked away for the qualitative team too. Some of you worked on qualitative stuff as well. Hey, can you take one more picture?
Oh, yeah.
Is Danica here? No, okay, this is it. Just you two? Well, thank you. This is a good segue. You guys all. Okay, so, oh yeah. Perfect, thank you.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm gonna stay out of this one.
Okay,
I didn't work.
all right, 1, 2, 3. Wonderful, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. And lastly, Alison Pacific. This is Alessandra. She's actually been with us on this project since our first semester. It was your first semester at Berkeley, right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I'd like to just take it away, if you don't mind taking a couple minutes, and she's just gonna kind of tell about her experience working on the project. Thank you.
So as Seth said, I believe the very first undergraduate research they took up on the project, so I've been here throughout the whole thing. I've taken a lot of different assignments, both qualitative and quantitative. Like here I have some from the very beginning, kind of in a timeline, they're not exactly in order, but I started off by creating a spreadsheet of all California counties, like with their demographic and political demographics. So the percentage of different race demographics, the poverty rates, if they voted yes or no on Prop 64, and we put it all in a big spreadsheet with all the different counties in California, so we can see that. I created timelines that focused on news articles, focused on like drug bust or cannabis stories for specific California counties. So we would go and look up for news articles based on like, for example, one of the ones I did was based on Riverside, and I would search up like Riverside County drug bust, Riverside County cannabis stories, and we would put it all in timelines. I conducted research into cannabis cultivation state laws passed by California state legislator and created a summary of the bills by populating a spreadsheet. I focused on tax equities by filling a spreadsheet with tax information and then drafting legal memos of the information I found for specific counties. So again, kind of like the news articles I was researching, I was able to look up like the tax and equity information for specific counties and then draft it into legal memos. So like a addressal of those specific counties. And leaning into the quantitative assignments, I was able to collect data from AI model CVAT for State Water Resources Control Board. And as Seth mentioned earlier with CVAT, like we are able to identify illegal cannabis cultivation locations through the aerial and satellite imagery system. Yeah.
I'd like to share a bit of stuff that I did after I actually wrote that. Most of the stuff kind of overlaps. I started summer 2024 after you started it, and then I think Alessandra combined all the information to the spreadsheet, and mainly I used those information, and then on top of that, I researched like some counties like specific laws and regulations on about this policy, and that was the first task I got assigned. So that's like problem research. And also did for 2024, I did a CVAT, so I analyzed all the satellite images, over like 200 of them. I just like clicked it, just like Seth mentioned, just like games, like sometimes like AI acknowledges the shadow as like a pond, and like, no, it's not. And then like going over the images. And then lastly, this semester I did mapping and infographics. So it's pretty different from the last task I had assigned before. And using like ArcGIS, I think many of you have like used it before, and I made like this tiny like map, like where the red one is like banned one, and then like blue, not red, green one is the like, permitted ones. And then also I created infographics for cannabis local control on Canva, like these two is like this one is like actually on the so that it can be used for the report. Yeah, those are the things I did.
Thank you guys so much for talking a bit about the work that you've done. It's really great. And I think that wraps us up for this presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. Do you have anything to finish with?
Just these QR codes are up here for a reason. If you want to follow our work, I'm the newsletter curator, so the Cannabis Research Center. If you scan that, you could follow or sign up for our newsletter, and then our link tree if we have events. We just like ended our researcher conversation series with other kind of cannabis researchers and kind of representatives across the state. And so if you want to follow our work, it's there. Otherwise, I think pass it on to Paul.
Yeah, thank you to the CRC. This is the first time we've ever done like a collaboration event, and I'm just so happy to see all the amazing undergraduate work that's going on campus. Alrighty, next we have an intermission. Grab some food outside. Again, thank you to the CRC.
Yeah, can I make food announcements real quick?
Yes.
There's some, what do you say, LaCroix?
LaCroix.
There's some LaCroix. And then there is some
Coke Zero.
Coke Zero. Yeah, and then for food, we have in celebration in honor of our Native American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We also have banh and spring rolls. And so let's see. For spring rolls, we have tofu, chicken, and pork. Those are kind of clearly labeled with some accompanying sauces. I don't think any of those sauces are vegan, so just FYI. And then there are spoons, for the spring rolls, they're a bit sticky, and they weren't individually wrapped, they usually are sometimes by plastic, but we don't like that, so just pick and then maybe get a spoon to like separate it. For the sandwiches or bunnies, same thing, pork, tofu, and chicken. And the tofu ones are vegan. If you want, you can add the nom nom sauce, they call it, that's accompanying the tofu ones, it's right next to it too. Otherwise,
Yeah, the tofu ones have a vegan sauce next to them.
yeah,
Yeah, so those are, and then also.
sorry, the sauce has egg there, so it makes it, yeah, vegetarian. But the sandwiches themselves are vegan.
Or we switched them out for vegan sauce.
Oh, there we go,
Yeah.
perfect, yeah, lovely, yay. Okay.
Yes.
That's the latest, otherwise, yeah, please help yourself with food.
Enjoy. We'll be back at 6. Yes, for the next presentation.
Okay, hey everyone on Zoom, we're gonna take a quick break. Just chill, hang out. We'll be back. Hey everyone on Zoom. Oh, no, you're good. I think it's recording. I hope it's recording. Pause recording, stop recording. Yes, it's recording.
Yes, please sign in if you haven't already. This helps us a lot. Thanks to everyone for sticking around. Hope the food's good. We're gonna get started with our next presentation on cannabis farming. And then when it keeps. Okay. Okay. You guys are, they're gonna give you a. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. We are the Cannabis Farming Committee with SURG. I'm Celeste. This is Mia. We're the co-leads on this project. First of all, I just wanted to say a special thank you to the CRC and everyone from the CRC right now who was able to collaborate with us on the symposium. And also for all your guidance and support to the professors and everyone over the last 2 years in really helping our projects come to fruition. So we have about 3 projects today that we want to share. These are some of the relevant SDGs that they connect to. But we're just going to hop straight in on the first project, which is looking at the potential for cannabis farms to impair stream flow with their water extraction for their farms.
So we were working with Chris Dillis from the CRC using a water modeling framework that was done by CBFW. So we were trying to estimate water extraction patterns from cannabis, both permitted and unpermitted farms in California. The question we wanted to answer is what's the potential of cannabis farms to create adverse reductions in stream flow by varying degrees and timing of extractions throughout the month. And we wanted to determine an optimized extraction pattern for cannabis farms that would minimize the impairment of water resources and any sort of environmental concerns with water extraction. And some of the limitations we considered is that extraction can occur from groundwater. Most extraction that cannabis farms are doing is groundwater and not surface water, which is not included in this framework. In addition, it doesn't consider the forbearance period, which is a period in which farms can't extract water from April to October. And it also does not consider current outcomes. Oh yeah, they don't consider that it assumes farms are extracting at one specific time at the same time, same day across all of the farms. For extraction. And the significance of the problem is looking at the impacts of stream dewatering. This can cause a lot of ecological impacts on things like salmon. And there's also history of poor enforcement of water regulation, especially when it comes to water extraction patterns.
So essentially what we're doing with this project is we're taking 3 primary variables within the modeling framework that we presented and manipulating them in R to then apply our scenarios. So the inputs we have are we're taking the monthly water budget, which is essentially how much water is available within each catchment for farms to extract from. we're taking the monthly water demand, which was calculated in the framework, and is how much each individual farm needs based on its current production to support itself, and then stream flow after non-cannabis extraction, which is all other agriculture and residential extraction from the stream flow, which is particularly fascinating in this data set because there were already a lot of cases where they had negative values for stream flow, which means that agriculture and residents alone have the capacity to fully deplete stream flow. And so really, like, cannabis in this sense isn't exactly a main contributor to impairment, because in order to be comparable, it would have to see that 100% impairment of stream flow, which in our results will be shown that that's not really the case.
So to kind of go through more of like our methods, there were two major parts to this analysis. The first part was taking the monthly stream flow values and dividing them into daily stream flow values. So that just involved writing a function that was able to divide those values by the number of days in the relevant month it was from. And then the actual main analysis we did was applying those extraction profiles. So we wrote three functions depending on how many days are in the month. So that's the one for February if you're interested. And we basically applied this equation, which is the daily stream flow value minus a percentage of the monthly extraction for the farms of that catchment. So the extraction pattern value there would be like 1 if everyone's extracting on the same day, or like 0.5 if half the farms are extracting. And then we were able to make impairment percentages, which is kind of how we quantify our results. And then our final data table kind of looks like this. So those are ID numbers, just so we know what catchment and farm everything is coming from. The daily stream flow is our provided data. That remaining stream flow column is the result of that equation. The impairment percent is there, and then we just have our temporal data as the data.
So our results are formatted in 4 histograms, with frequency is on the y-axis, which talks about days that streams are impaired, and then impairment percentage on the x-axis is the severity of stream impairment, so how much water is actually extracted from streams. So we found that daily less severe extraction limits dewatering impacts. This is that purple graph. You can see that there's not that extreme extraction. It's about 10% impairment percent, and the frequency is about 40 farms. So that is the most ideal scenario. This is when extraction is spread out over the course of the month, and not all farms are extracting at one single point within the month. And we also found that the scenario with the most severe stream impairment was biweekly extraction. This is that green graph, just because the impairment percentages tended to be higher, so they were more towards the right of the graph, and we saw similar frequencies between biweekly and monthly extraction, which is why this is classified as the worst level of impairment for streams.
So another project that we did, we're actually gonna get a paper published. I believe Seth was talking about it earlier, but it has to do with like the different parts of the memo that we've been working on. It goes for like pesticide, energy use, land use, and different kinds of environmental and policy law issues. So this is one of the things that we were looking at, the cannabis land use issues portion of it, had to do with like cannabis does not fall under the Williamson Act as an agricultural crop. This brings difficulties as to what it could be, what it can get through, but it varies amongst different counties. So if they're allowed to, but they have to do environmental protection, they have to fall in line with. But board and councils have heavy influence on what agricultural preserves is defined as, and they can change the definitions based on what they see fit. If a business is able to fall under what an agricultural preserve is, then they're allowed 20 to 75% tax reductions, which can essentially help their businesses operate a little bit smoother. Also, there's no specific acreage allotted for the different counties. Different counties that we looked at were Ventura, Mendocino, Humboldt, but they all vary based on like the permits that are allowed, regulations that they have, different laws that fall with each county. Another one that we looked into was the cannabis rights to farm. So this one pertains to how California protections are only applicable to agriculture operations, activities, and facilities. Again, this is a little bit different because cannabis is not directly identified as an agricultural crop. They're protected against nuisances complaints that falls in line with protection against noise, odor, pollution, other different concerns. Although if these concerns are a threat to public health and safety, then they can't fall under the cannabis rights to farm. There's different cases that we looked at. Some were successful, some were not. These cases depended on odor complaints, so some were very influenced by the public, whether if they were properly sued or if they were not.
So the next component of this project was looking at pesticide application and regulation as it pertains to cannabis. Particularly the discrepancies between hemp and cannabis products, because hemp is a product that can be regulated federally. Whereas since of course cannabis isn't legally federally legalized, it doesn't get these additional protections under federal legislation. And it's really up to the states to determine whether or not pesticides can be registered and used on cannabis. And the states a real lack of defined residue levels allowable for cannabis products, and also a gap in toxicity research, especially when it comes to inhaling products as opposed to simply ingesting them, and the different ways that pesticides break down in your body based off that, which poses a potential health risk, especially since under California, cannabis products are all required to be tested in labs. These are third-party facilities that are highly expensive and often doesn't really incentivize farms to go through the legalization process or follow these regulations, and also really leads to consumers not exactly knowing what's in their products.
Principal authority is the State Water Resources Control Board, who works in conjunction with the Departments of Food and Ag, Fish and Wildlife, and Cannabis Control, completing audits, inspections, and investigations that can result in fines of up to $5,000 for using an unidentified or unpermitted water source. The main pieces of legislation to be aware of are the Cannabis Policy and the Cannabis Cultivation General Order, both of which became effective in December 2017. The Cannabis Policy includes the majority of cannabis regulations, with water-related categories such as water diversion, storage, and use, riparian and wetland protection, irrigation runoff, erosion and drainage, and stream crossing. The general order deals primarily with waste discharge and potential environmental contamination. The small use irrigation registration allows cultivators to obtain a small appropriate water right, small meaning up to 6.6 acre-feet per year of surface or groundwater diversion that can then be stored off stream. Rain catchments, wells, and retail water suppliers all have pretty standard regulations, but surface and groundwater diversion necessitates more stringent requirements, the main one being a forbearance period from April 1st to October 31st, where cultivators are not allowed to divert water in order to protect dry season water levels. Additionally, at least 50% of surface water must be bypassed by cultivators past that point of diversion. And the monitoring of surface water diversion is carried out via water level gauges managed by the U.S. Geological Survey and the California Data Exchange Center, although individual cultivators are responsible for installing gauges under certain conditions. Also of note is the fact that traditional agricultural crops are subject to less stringent diversion and storage requirements, often having guaranteed and subsidized water costs, even year-round. Thank you. Principal authority.
And then the next thing that we looked at was sort of policy surrounding energy use. And one thing that we found is that cannabis producers in California must report their total energy usage, and their greenhouse gas emissions intensity must be less than or equal to that of their local utility provider, or they will have to purchase carbon credits to make up the difference. And these requirements are not shared by traditional agriculture companies, as well as, due to the illegal status of it within the federal government, a lot of subsidies, such as things for solar, cannabis companies are not eligible for those. Another big thing that came up a lot was generators and the impact of them. They historically have been used a lot, especially in indoor cannabis operations, and they have some significant environmental impacts. The generator that's used to power like a backpack leaf blower that you might see, running that for an hour produces the same level of emissions as if you drove a car from here to Denver. So that is tricky, and the rules and regulations surrounding their use are very variable, county to county in California. And then finally, just sort of as an example, the Bay Area Air Quality Monitoring District is sort of cracking down on this, and they're finding operations found to be using generators $75,000 per generator per day.
Okay, and this semester we had like an awesome opportunity to actually interview a grower, and her name is Susie Dew. She's right there, and she's the co-founder of Abaco, which is a small female and farmer-owned business. And what's cool about her farm is that it's regenerative. This basically means she described it as closing the loops. Basically, took a holistic approach to farming where the overall goal is to better the ecosystem and the soil. She does so by directly planting in the soil and also creating her own input. This includes like solar power for energy and rain catchment system for water. But one of the main points of contention she has is the legislative struggle she has as a small business. She talks about the excessive financial demand it has on these small businesses, There's excessive fees if it comes to counties, states, even getting the license. And it just makes it hard for these smaller companies to compete with larger ones and making it difficult for them to sustain in the long term. And even for programs that are supposed to benefit these farmers, like OCAL, which is like a cannabis certification program, it's supposed to help these farmers, but there's like excessive fees. So in this case, there's $6,000 in upfront fees. And if you fail to pay on time, there's a 50% penalty, which is a lot. But yeah, also this is a QR link to her website. Hopefully it works. But yeah, if you want to check it out, pretty cool.
And we thought it'd be only fit, that at the end of the cannabis committee, we've been running for 2 years, and me and Celeste have been really grateful to be able to take this over from Nicole. We thought it'd be only fit to do a 2-year wrap up. So year one, we were in sectors, and our 3 general takeaways from each of those sectors were that cannabis cultivation can lead to detrimental ecological impacts, with urban communities facing unique impacts, and those are marginalized communities such as people in the open green zone and Native American communities. And there's kind of this disconnect between water regulation and water data availability. And this year we kind of focused, I guess, more on the policy side of things, where in comparison to traditional ag, cannabis was subject to much harsher regulations, which is due to it receiving less funding and also due to the social stigma associated with cannabis. And the cannabis policy landscape in California varies greatly county from county, with cannabis cultivation not even being legal in some counties, and small farms are disadvantaged in the cannabis industry in California. And that is due to the increased commercialization of cannabis and just pushing out small businesses. And also cannabis is a very new industry where maybe those protections for small businesses haven't really been put in place yet. And also cannabis cultivation is often unfortunately motivated by profit maximization and dominated by these really large corporations, often those who also produce alcohol products. And yeah, thank you.
Do we have any questions for cannabis farming? Did you come across any issues when it came to the data project, the data coding?
Oh, so many. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of data to work with, and it came in a format that was like not great, so we had to reorganize it a lot. We had to write different functions for every single month. The months having different days really like the whole thing. Yeah, but it was just like the normal coding problems. Like, I don't know how to do this. How do I get this data frame in this format, which it will plot? But I feel like we worked through it in a reasonable amount of time.
There's, yeah, a lot more we can do with the project, including, contextualizing it and, writing a paper or something on actual ecological disadvantages, sorry. Especially we were thinking like, of a potential threshold level under which, like, if shoe flow dips below it, how exactly that might lead to like extreme adverse effects. And we also want to modify it so that farms are extracting as only like certain percentages of their monthly extraction value on different days, and maybe mess with the scenarios a little bit more because we did really basic scenarios. A lot to expand upon if you want to. Don't be shy. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I want to picture you guys. Thank you, Ping, for the idea.
Oh, wait, let me go back.
Wait, Nicole should be. Yeah.
No,
guys.
no.
No.
Yeah.
That's so much.
Oh my god, you guys are so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh my god, the food about that. Awesome. Up next, we have Kelp Deforestation Committee. Awesome. Are you good?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Perfect. Take it away. One more on the side. Everybody, we are the Kelp Deforestation Committee. So this semester, we've been going on for a year. This semester, we worked on a literature review about the causes, effects, and current restoration efforts on kelp deforestation along the California coast specifically. We did some really cool research on just kelp deforestation in general. We also interviewed a lot of professionals in the field, from local organizations to scientists. And then we also got to do a field trip to Bodega Marine Laboratory, where they are doing their own kelp restoration project. And we'll talk about that more later. Oh, here's us.
So one of the main causes of kelp deforestation is climate change. Kelp naturally flourishes in cool, nutrient-rich oceans, but climate change is really disrupting that balance. Natural climate events like El Niños and marine heat waves normally happen occasionally, but because of the effects of climate change, they're happening more often, they're lasting longer, and they're hitting harder. And these events are associated with warmer ocean temperatures, which, as I said, is really harmful for kelp. It leads to higher mortality rates, diminished growth rates and reproductive success, decreased biodiversity, and nutrient-poor ocean concentrations. So these natural climate patterns, we can't help that they happen, but we can hopefully help that diminishing the climate change effects will make the overlap less significant.
Another primary cause of kelp deforestation is the sunflower sea star wasting disease. Sunflower sea stars are vital parts of marine ecosystems whose decline due to disease is having detrimental impacts on kelp. So the emergence of the disease was in 2013, which since then has affected 5.75 billion sea stars, which is 90% of the world's population. The direct pathogen is still being researched, but studies have proven that the disease is spread through direct contact and amplified by temperature change, pH change, and pollution levels. There have also been studies exploring the link to oxygen depletion, which leads to increased presence of anaerobic microbes, which break down sea star surfaces. So the symptoms include white lesions, disfiguration, and dissolving. As for the impacts on kelp, sea stars prey on purple urchins, who are the primary predators of kelp. And this top-down effect due to the disruption of the food chain is what causes this kelp loss. So there are currently still a lot of research efforts in progress to initiate captive breeding and other rehabilitation methods, as well as exploring the effects of nutrition addiction.
So another main cause of kelp deforestation is purple urchins. So as discussed before, purple urchins are the main predators of sunflower sea stars. But since the sea stars are no longer in the oceans on the coast, purple urchin populations have immensely increased. And so something about urchins is that they are herbivores. So their main food source is these kelp spores and kelp that grow up in the bottom of the ocean. These purple urchins can also stay dormant, so they don't need that much food or nutrients to survive. So they can spend months and months without any food and just collecting nutrients from the water. So this is a problem since kelp needs to settle on the floor and then grow from the sediment. But as the spores are growing, the urchins will come and eat all the kelp spores. So thus leads to urchin barrens happening along the coast. And so the main efforts are mainly human-led to deal with this urchin population. So right now, the main way that we are dealing with purple urchins is culling. So divers are going down along the coastlines and manually scooping up and collecting all these urchins. So it's very labor intensive, it's very expensive. So it's not the best option, but right now it is the main way to get rid of urchin populations.
So kelp plays an important role in the blue economy, which is a sustainable ocean-based industries, including aquaculture, biotech, and coastal protection. And the economic impact of kelp is that it generates around $500 billion a year in their ecosystem services, and the benefits of this kelp industry includes fisheries, carbon sequestration, and nutrient cycling. So around the world, there has been an expansion of the kelp industry. For example, in Norway, they focus on sustainable farming and tech innovation of kelp, and China is the biggest producer of kelp. And right now they're investing in breeding research for long-term sustainability. And in the United States, Alaska is currently addressing infrastructure gaps and regulations with hubs such as Kelp Collab. And a future outlook of the kelp economy is Right now, they're trying to scale up seaweed farming, establish a lot of conservation zones for kelp ecosystems, and mitigate climate change through ocean-based solutions.
Another big impact of climate change is coastal erosion and its effect on coastal communities. Economically, kelp forests serve as kind of a habitat for a lot of the commercially valuable species we eat, like fish, lobster, crabs, things like that. It provides the nutrients for these species to flourish and just like a habitat for them to grow up. And obviously, coastal communities rely a lot on either tourism or the fishing industry. In the UK alone, lobster and cod fisheries brought in about 60 million pounds in 2011. The loss of land causes major coastal erosion. So, like villages on the coast, especially in poorer countries, are swept away by huge storms and landslides. Human activity also exacerbates the problem. Destructive farming practices can make the soil weaker and make it more susceptible to landslides. It also creates a damaging psychological effect on the people who live in these coastal communities. A lot of them that were interviewed in a study stated that after their homes were destroyed, they fell into a deep depression. They felt like they had nothing to live for, and even after moving away from their homes, they felt they missed their homes, but they were too afraid of the sea storms to go back. And one of the methods of restoration, there have been many proposed methods of stopping coastal erosion, but it's like a hotly contested issue because many different groups have like different ideas of how to do it correctly. One of the methods is the installation of T-groins, which stops coastal erosion and sediments from moving along the coast.
Another major effect of kelp deforestation is the reduced ability for carbon sequestration. So kelp ecosystems are a huge carbon sink, as they actually sequester more carbon than any other coastal ecosystem. And this process occurs as kelp first captures carbon through photosynthesis. And then kelp has these air-filled bladders that allow it to float out deep into sea, where it breaks down into small particles. And then these particles become buried in the deep sea sediment, where they can be sequestering carbon for hundreds of years. And climate change is actually actively threatening this ability for kelp ecosystems to sequester carbon. And this is due to the marine heat waves. And marine heat waves are expected to affect lower latitude waters and warm them up. And the increased temperature increases metabolic activity, which increases the decomposition rate of the kelp particles. So this means that less kelp is being brought out to the deep sea because it's being decomposed faster. And this is causing a faster release of atmospheric kelp.
The health of kelp systems is essential in preserving the health of coastal regions as they provide a foundation for marine ecosystems to thrive around the world. The primary reason for this, as mentioned before, is because kelp allows for biodiversity. Kelp are habitat-forming species, which means that they provide shelter, nurseries, and a multitude of food systems for marine organisms, many of which are conservation targets. So they essentially allow like many threatened species to thrive and reproduce naturally. Kelp also controls the movement of fluids on the ocean floor because their sheltered canopies provide spaces for plankton larvae to disperse. And this also contributes to the dispersion of nutrients throughout the ocean, not just the coasts where the kelp live. And finally, they also regulate sediment transport by protecting shores against the damage of waves. And because of their importance, the loss of kelp does also have detrimental impacts on marine organisms. There have been many studies, including some using subtidal monitoring techniques, that have shown since the significant loss of kelp forests, there have also been significant declines in the abundance of many vital marine organisms.
So current restoration efforts, one of the main ones is trying to find ways to regrow kelp in labs or find other ways to allow kelp to regrow. So there's short-term and long-term projects going on right now. So in short term, one of the methods is urchin removal, which I talked about by divers manually going down, removing the urchins one by one. And then another technique is the green gravel technique. So this is putting kelp spores on little pebbles and then releasing those into the ocean so they can get a large area of kelp in a short period of time to try and have it so they can overpopulate the urchin populations and try to grow. And there's another short-term solution we will be discussing later. In long term, more so just seeing if there's a way to genetically modify the kelp or find genes that allow the kelp to be more resilient to changing temperatures, pH, and other factors that climate change is causing. Kelp forests are extremely important, as you've heard, for coastal ecosystems, marine ecosystems. So researchers are really trying to find ways to protect these ecosystems. That is the project so far that we know on kelp regrowth.
Another restoration effort is Reef Check, which is a global nonprofit organization that helps conserve coral reefs and kelp forests through community-led restoration. They basically partner with local volunteers and educate stakeholders to support their coastal ecosystem and their economies. So it started in 2013 when they saw kelp loss due to the decline of sunflower sea stars, which caused urchin barrens. And so Reef Check adopted Peace Corps protocols to expand monitoring and guide adaptive restoration. And so their key efforts in California include restoration projects in Big Sur, Mendocino, and St. Croix Reef, focusing on both kelp recovery. And so that picture is an example of Noyo Cove, where on the left side was like a year back, and then on the right side is like the 20% return of their kelp density. And the challenges that Reef Check are facing is, the challenges that Reef Check is facing is their kindness scaling urchin culling is limited by permits and resource constraints, making it really difficult. But their impacts is they demonstrate how action and policy can drive coastal resilience.
Following the die-offs caused by sea star wasting disease, a lot of scientific research has been directed to the genetic side of sea star restoration. Efforts to understand the genetics of sea star wasting disease resistance might be the key to the reintroduction of sea stars. Dr. Lauren Stavelhut, who works with the Sunflower Sea Star Lab, is spearheading this investigation into genetics. She studies the sea stars that survived the initial die-offs and is breeding them in a lab and hopes to eventually reintroduce them into the wild. Studying genomic data would also allow scientists to gauge the genetic diversity of the populations, therefore deciding which species are more likely to be resistant to another outbreak should it occur. There's also a lot of different environmental considerations. Populations along the West Coast were decimated by sea star wasting disease. Obviously, they have like warmer temperatures, but sea stars in fjord habitats appear to be responding differently. It's theorized that the snowmelt in the spring and summer season reduces the salinity of the ocean, which drives the sea stars into lower temperature waters. Temperature is hypothesized to be a factor in disease dynamics, so scientists are looking into that as of April 2025. Reintroduction strategy, timing is also a very big part in the success of reintroduction. Scientists suggest introducing a lot of age groups and introducing them during spring and summer, which is during the sea stars breeding season, so they can be well populated before fall, which is usually when sea star wasting disease pops up.
Other restoration efforts can be taken on by citizens and people in the community. The Giant Kelp Restoration Project is a group of about 700 citizen certified divers who will take matters into their own hands in Takers Reef, Monterey, California. They go down and basically extrapolate all of the purple urchins in this 2.5 acre urchin barren using the urchin culling techniques Imogene was talking about. They also partner with commercial fisheries to really advocate and spread awareness about this situation and just get as many people as they can involved.
We had the opportunity to see kelp restoration research in person by visiting the Bodega Marine Laboratory and Reserve. So in the lab, researchers like Julieta Gomez, who we met with, are experimenting with using kelp spores to restore the bull kelp ecosystems along the Sonoma County coast. And this project begins by first collecting spores from kelp in the waters of Bodega Bay, and then inoculating twine with these spores and letting them develop under grow lights until they reach the greenhouse stage. And then once they've developed further, they are transferred to bigger tanks. And then from there, the spores are harvested and they can be layered into something called a spore bag. And these are just a vessel to keep the spores contained. And then these spore bags are outplanted by divers at sites along the bay, where they will hopefully release spores that will grow into gold kelp plants. And one major challenge of this research has been seasonality, because kelp has specific growing conditions dependent on the season. So if the spore bags aren't outplanted in favorable conditions, the spores may delay their development, which can make it difficult to track the success of the project. Regardless of this method has been proving successful at other research sites, such as in Mendocino.
Here's some fun photos we took on our field trip. We were able to, as you said, go see kelp being grown in the lab, and then we also were introduced to a lot of kelp species in Bodega Bay. So then we went out onto a beach by ourselves in Bodega Bay and tried to find as many kelp species as we could. Had a little fun day along the lab, and it was a beautiful day. We saw lots of wildlife. We saw a whale and some baby harbor seals too. So really recommend heading up to the Bodega Marine Lab. They have like seminars all the time. They also have like classes you can take there. So very cool opportunity. And that's it. All of the restoration efforts that you guys mentioned in your research, which do you think is like the most feasible and will make the most difference? Yeah, we asked some of the main researchers we met at the Bodega Marine Lab, and they said right now the most efforts that is working is outplanting the kelp that they grow in labs. And so the way they do is try not to put it on the actual ground. So they put a rope inside the ocean and then put the spores on the rope so the kelp can still grow up without being eaten by the urchins on the seafloor. And that has been the most productive method so far. And then we asked them about the reintroduction of predators, but they're like, there is unforeseen consequences in reintroducing predators to these ecosystems who have had predators for a very long time, that it's also just more scientifically unknown what could happen and what could change in the ecosystems. So right now they said mostly just outplanting the kelp is what is working right now, and what they hope to kind of move along most of the coast and have more fields and studied where they are outplanting kelp.
Does outplanting work the same way in all different oceans and different temperatures, or does it vary kind of depending on location?
It does depend on different conditions, but so a lot of these labs are working on outplanting kelp are in Northern California, because right now in Southern California there is warmer ocean temperatures, so the kelp forests are not not being as badly deforested, if that makes sense. So right now efforts are mostly on working on northern species, just because there are different species of kelp. There's many of them, and then the ones in the north coast are more adapted to colder temperatures. So they're working on seeing if those in different conditions, pH change, temperature, those are having any adverse effect to their growth, because the warmer species are able to grow back in those warmer temperatures as oceans are increasing, since they're already used to those warmer temperatures. Hey, great job, you guys. Great job, you guys. Thank you. Awesome. Amazing. Alrighty. Up next, we have our Environmental Education Committee. Round of applause for them. Yes.
Everyone good on Zoom? Okay, cool.
We are the Environmental Education Committee.
I will let everyone introduce themselves. I'm Lillian, I'm one of the committee leads.
I'm Erin, I'm with the.
I'm Rose Sullivan, I'm also committee lead.
I'm Alexa.
I'm Isabella.
And I'm Bella.
Awesome, so our relevant SDG was number 4, quality education, and our project goals were to gain an understanding of how well educated Berkeley students are about environmental issues, how accessible and effective environmental education is here at Berkeley in its current state, and also learn student and faculty perspectives about environmental education. So first, we're going to be getting into the survey that we conducted. So kind of a summary of our whole semester, we examined existing studies on college students, finding out that 79% of Alameda County adults fear climate change and 85% of them want schools to address causes, consequences, and solutions. And we also saw that studies of college students indicate that college students and college-age citizens possess high levels of concern for the environment, but they have lower levels of actual environmental knowledge. And we wanted to assess the level of environmental literacy of Berkeley students, their level of engagement with environmental activities, such as taking classes here, and their opinions on implementing a new requirement, similar to how we have our American Cultures requirement. And so to do this, we constructed and distributed a short survey with factual multiple choice questions, factual short answer questions, and also opinion and experience-based multiple choice and short answer questions. Here's a photo of us tabling to try to get people to say their something.
Yeah, so we don't really have time to go into the full results of the survey, since this is part of our last semester project, but you're welcome to scan the QR code, especially if you weren't here last semester, and just take a look at our results. We got 126 people to complete the survey, 119 undergraduates, and then we did also have to filter out a few responses for people who were sort of clearly not answering in good faith. We were able to get 64 unique majors, which is really great. We wanted to make sure we got a very wide spread to get a better sense of how well educated the general Berkeley population is. The mean score for our factual section of the survey was 67%. And our most challenging questions were the ones that assessed more specific knowledge about the largest fossil fuel emitter, the cause of ocean acidification, and then this tricky one about whether natural variation explains the climate change in recent decades. The answer is no, but that's sort of a conservative talking point, so we wanted to see what people think of that. And then again, these were just some of our more challenging questions. Most people were able to sort of identify climate change impacts in their area. Most people couldn't really either identify or describe an environmental law that impacted.
And then some key takeaways from the opinion and experience section were that a good portion of students reported that their views on environmental issues changed after attending Berkeley, and that many have had access to classes that taught environmental subjects. And then for the results concerns that came up from the survey, were participants asking questions about how efficient these classes would be, how the additional requirement would affect graduation times and expectancies and course load for our students, and how student interest would actually dictate the efficiency of the courses.
We did a little bit of additional analysis from last semester based on some questions we had at the symposium, and we actually analyzed the results across different major groups. The main group we found that was pretty distinct from the others were students who are in environmental type majors, which is good. That's sort of the result we wanted to find. But it was pretty consistent across the rest of the major groups, with the exception of our question about % yes for an environmental education requirement. While we generally found a pretty high amount of support for that, the business and econ majors were consistently the lowest group. However, I will just say we did have a pretty small sample size, so we can't really draw definitive conclusions from these results. And then we'll move into our next section, which is what we did this semester about faculty interviews. These were our interview questions. I'm not going to read all of them out, but this is just sort of generally what we wanted to ask our faculty members. And we didn't get through every single question for a faculty member, but we got through most of them.
So I interviewed Dr. Michelle Feldman. She's an assistant teaching professor in the integrated bio department. She taught bio 1B last semester and specifically focused on the organismal bio section. So when I asked her about the importance of environmental education, she kind of focused on the idea that climate change, while like a massive thing that we have to address, can always start somewhere small and then build up to larger impacts. And then her 3 main takeaways for specifically bio 1B is that she wanted students to notice plants. She wanted us to think about the role of plants and human interactions. And she wanted us to kind of focus on the interconnectedness of natural systems as a whole. And then for teaching strategies, well, for bio, she kind of focuses like on plants. She did talk about how at her last institution, she was proposing, or she taught a class on climate change and kind of taught it at a more personal rather than scientific level. She's trying to implement that here at Berkeley. And when I asked her about the environmental literacy requirement, she thought it was a great idea, but she did first set hurdles in regards to like graduation and interdepartmental relations that she thought would kind of throw a wrench in things, but overall she thought it was good.
So the next person we interviewed is Dr. Ken Worthy. He works in the EPSM department as a professor, and he taught EPSM 50AC. And when he was asked about the importance of environmental education, he said, and this is a quote, environmental changes represent a terrifying situation that requires a rethinking of human place in the world, which aligns a lot with the goal of this class, which is to talk about the social and environmental sort of intersections and who they impact, who is most vulnerable to climate change. So anyway, he mentioned that a lot of environmental issues are met with all or nothing thinking from college students, which is sort of similar to the results of our survey. Anyway, 3 key takeaways he wanted from his class were that major environmental and social problems exist and cannot be ignored, and that they are a product of our history. So they're a product of overconsumption, and they're a product of like social inequities. And finally, he wanted us to talk about who is most vulnerable to climate change and who climate change is impacting the most. So he's teaching about struggle, resistance, and success in making society more just and sustainable. So he wanted us to have a very holistic view of environmental education. The next person we interviewed is Dr. Sajat Benzer. She works in the CalTeach department and is teaching at STEM 82, which is like the intro to CalTeach, basically. So she's only working at Berkeley for a year, but she still had a lot of important thoughts about environmental education because that's what she does outside of Berkeley. She researches education and she does a lot of environmental research as well. She said she wanted students to be knowledgeable citizens when they take part in the democratic process, and a really essential part of that is being environmentally knowledgeable. Her takeaways were linking environmental studies with curiosity, inquiry, and being outdoors. And she wanted people to not just learn about the environment in sort of a passive way, she wanted them to be figuring it out, which is sort of like a keystone of her class, this idea of like inquiry-based learning, where it's sort of student-led. Anyway, her teaching strategies involve bringing local issues that relate to the environment to students' daily lives. Like in the class, we talked about how coho salmon are surviving in California streams and like what might change their survival rates. Anyway, she said in order to have an effective environmental education requirement, there would have to be different ways in. So basically ways to engage students of all different majors. So her suggestion was maybe having like multiple professors from different departments teaching a class, because that would be more appealing to a wider variety of students. Okay, and then the last person I interviewed was Angela Koo. She's the GSI for ESPM 15. And she's a graduate student in building science, technology, and sustainability, and she's also a Berkeley alum. She graduated last year. Anyway, she talked about the importance of environmental education as a multifaceted and interdisciplinary subject. And a lot of her class also addresses the nuances of consumerism. So basically, she's teaching students how to identify greenwashing and I guess how to like key signs to look for. Her 3 main takeaways were unpacking what climate change actually means, because this is such a huge intro class that a lot of underclassmen take. She wanted to make environmental science exciting and personalized because, again, it's such a huge class and there's such a variety of people taking it. And she wanted to break down such an overwhelming topic to make it more accessible to people. Her teaching strategies are similar to Sajat Benzer, where they're relatable and approachable examples that help people know what's going on. When asked about the environmental requirement, she said maybe integrating environmental science into existing courses could be a really great way to make environmental education more accessible and impactful without maybe having an additional graduation requirement.
So Andy couldn't be here today, so I'm gonna be taking over the slides. She interviewed GSI Annika Cobb. And in response to the importance of environmental education is kind of being more understanding and informed about these problems in regards to their studies and their future work. Her three main takeaways were to be engaged with historical context, have curiosity and engagement with the subject that they're taking, and to think critically about the material they're engaging with and how it kind of relates to issues of the modern day. And when asked about the additional takeaways we asked about, she said that Berkeley does well at exposing students to real climate policies, which allows them to then think critically and technically and theoretically in regards to their graduation plans as well.
And then I interviewed Tiffany Thind, a climate action fellow and a recent graduate from Berkeley's Department of Development Engineering program. In response to our first question, she stated that it all comes back to our loss of relationship with nature that our ancestors once had. And she emphasized the importance of environmental education in regards to raising our collective awareness of the factors that go into environmental degradation and using environmental education as a tool to reestablish our connection and understanding of the natural environment. And then for takeaways that she would want people to take from her classes are the core concepts of permaculture, which are earth care, people care, and fair share, which she describes as earth care in which you are not only using the earth, but also taking care of it back. People care, making sure the people in your community are well taken care of, and fair share in regards to sustainability of making sure that if you are producing something agriculturally, that you're not just producing enough for the people within your community, but also the other living beings in your community as well, such as animals and other beings. And for teaching strategies, she really emphasized the use of hope when teaching students because of the rampant climate nihilism that permeates a lot of these courses and permeates a lot of the culture surrounding discussions of environmental degradation. And she also emphasized the use of experience-based learning in order to really reestablish students' connections with nature to build on that care for the environment and the natural world. For her additional questions, she really emphasized the importance of systemic change when making changes to environmental education and how we have to understand the roots of issues facing us in the environment, in particular when it comes to climate change, in order to be able to make changes in the future. Okay, and key takeaways from our questions were, for our first question, was the importance of environmental education, and a lot of the things that were brought up were recognizing the interconnectedness of nature systems and human life, emphasizing the politics of hope and empowerment, and expanding environmental education past climate change and recognizing the intersectionality of all environmental topics. Key strategies that were brought up were relatability, critical thinking, and using different lenses to be able to analyze the point at which we are in for our current environmental standing, and having hope. From our extra questions, our main takeaways were that as it stands, Berkeley has a diverse catalog of courses regarding environmental sciences, and they're relatively available to students, and that environmental policy is well covered in a lot of these courses. And in regards to concerns for implementing a new graduation requirement, a lot of concerns are brought up about how it would be integrated and how it would affect students trying to graduate and how realistic it would be in terms of an administrative view.
Okay, so the third kind of aspect was community building on our project. So we collaborated with people from SURG Eco Office as well as additional faculty. We're planning to continue collaboration with the Eco Office on campus. We're looking at updating the GBO modules and providing a section on sustainability and other possible environmental education requirements
that start before like a campus-wide educational requirement like the AC requirement. We engaged also in the climate education focus group to provide feedback to faculty directly. So improvements in the GBO model, we're planning to add in topics such as waste management, Strawberry Creek importance, Berkeley wildlife, and like local laws and initiatives. So students who are arriving to UC Berkeley campus can automatically get climate aware, and a lot of the stuff, like I was a GBO leader, is super pointless. So this stuff is important and hopefully can help students know actual important information. We hosted water testing events as part of our committee as well to kind of pilot what environmental education can look like hands-on. We hosted a water sampling event during one of our general meetings that some of y'all were at to pilot bringing a group of people to water test. This was in partnership with Earth Echo International, a water-based educational focused international nonprofit. We hosted also an open invite community event to engage students in water testing, learn about preserving and protecting ecosystems, as well as providing the opportunity for citizen science. So just like bringing people in and hosting these events so people can learn about environmental education, gather data, tested turbidity, pH, all that stuff. It was really, really fun. We had pizza and food. And it was just a really great time to like engage in environmental education and bring anyone who wants to come in into that. So yeah, what comes next?
So for project summary and insights, we found that Berkeley has a strong environmental program and strong people who care about the environment here, but it'd be great to spread this education to other major departments. And we found that student and faculties are generally supportive, but have concerns about graduation requirements, efficacy, student interest, and funding. And we also found that environmental education isn't just about classes, student boards, and clubs really play a big part. And some of our next steps, we want to further collaborate with SURG. We want to potentially use our research to argue for environmental requirement for similar policies with federal funding less of an issue. And a possible future research direction would be to gauge students' interest in the environment before and after participating in environmental activity versus before and after watching a presentation like this one. And that's it.
Do you have any questions? Yes. Do you think your results, like the interviews with faculty, would be different if you were people that weren't like in EXPO or like environmental like professors? Like if you interview like maybe like an engineer.
Most likely, yes. I think having like interviewing an engineer would introduce a different perspective. They might talk about like, okay, we have this class in our program that requires students to learn about something sustainable. My friend's a civil engineer and she had to take my class. So I just, anyone else?
I tried to reach out to like someone in the English department. I never got a response, but she teaches like a seminar about I think it's the Anthropocene, so like focusing on like literature and connection with the environment. So that would have been interesting to like see her response. But yeah, I do think it would be very in the cost department.
It could be surveys as well, or I guess responses from like all were taken together.
Yeah, it was mostly people on campus. We wanted to focus our efforts. We got a few grad students, but there weren't enough of them. We had to take the results from the survey.
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question, like, I know there was a lot of like on-campus focus, but like, what are some like thoughts or projections on if you expanded this off-campus, public engagement with about education and literacy?
Yeah, I know, like, I mean, we're fortunate enough that Berkeley High has a climate literacy requirement. And I know neighboring schools in the Bay Area have tried to adopt such a thing. I think it's like area specific and like how climate literacy and public awareness in like the Bay Area versus like maybe a small town in Alabama is gonna be like drastically different. And since people come to Cal from all across the world, like focusing on that's still going to be important. I think like definitely important to continue working with like public awareness in the general public and not just Berkeley students, but since Berkeley students have like a wider range of like where they're coming from versus the public being situated in more of like a pro climate education area, generally like that's what we thought is going to be kind of provide the most reach and impact. Cause like I'm from Berkeley and like I know that it is pretty good in this area. But like while we were doing our research, we were noticing even drastic differences, yeah, in like other areas, even in California. So it definitely is like place specific awareness reach.
Any questions?
I just comment, I think it was a great response, and I would be curious too, I mean, if anybody was continuing research, right? Like, they were pointing like where folks are coming from. Like, did you have a question, or maybe could you develop a question on like, you know, outside of like their major, right? Like, where geographically are they coming from, right? And that, how that might impact or inform their environmental.
Yeah. Well, that'd be a great question, right? Once again, students come from all over, so I think it would have to be designed in a way that would be easy to analyze with the level of, like, the number of responses we can get. If everybody's coming from a different city, or a different town, it would be sort of hard to parse that, but I think, yeah, it's an interesting question.
So, thank you guys. Oh, you I'm scared. Thank you.
Awesome.
Good job, you guys.
Another round of applause.
Alrighty. Last but certainly not least, we have overproduction in different industries. That's yeah, hold up.
I keep hearing that there's no blue, the way we're gonna talk about overproduction right now, but we know we out of order.
Hello everyone, we're going to be talking about overproduction in the food and fashion industries. And we're going to be more focused on the policy recommendations that we've come up with since talking about the causes last semester. Also, my name is Steva and
I'm Amelia.
I'm the co-committee leads.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Olivia.
I'm Maya.
I'm Lavanya.
I'm Lee.
So just a general rundown, we're going to talk about the previous policies that are within the food and fashion industries that are currently either being talked about or have already been legislated, and then where we want to go from there. So,
Yeah, so when we were formulating our policy recommendations, we looked at some existing policies. So this is the No Time to Waste Act and the School Food Recovery Act. Both of them were introduced into Congress but got stuck in committee, so neither of them actually passed, which was really unfortunate. But the No Time to Waste Act would basically mandate a 50% reduction of food waste in the US by 2030, which would be pretty significant, which is probably why it didn't pass. And it would also establish the Office of Food Loss and Waste in the USDA, which is really cool. The School Food Recovery Act would have covered up to 75% of the funding for food waste prevention and measurement programs in schools across the US. And it also would have invested in food waste education campaigns for students, just to teach them about the consequences of food waste and how we can prevent it in schools. And then SB 1383 was a bill introduced in California. This one actually did pass. It passed in 2016, went into effect in 2022, and its main goals were to reduce methane emissions from organic food waste, and also to recover food that's currently being wasted and to recover it for human consumption. Obviously food that's edible, not like food that's being like thrown out. But yeah, so basically it mandates that by 2025 we recover 20% of the edible food that's currently being discarded. And it also would mandate that by 2030 we divert 75% of organic food waste from landfills
and it also establishes mandatory composting for consumers. It's implemented differently across different types of businesses, so enforcement is gonna look different for a huge grocery store versus like a hospital or a school. And the main problem with SB 1383 is enforcement, which Amelia is gonna cover.
Yeah, so basically enforcement is very weak of SB 1383. They CalRecycle leaves enforcement to the jurisdiction, so like cities and counties, and they do not mandate how many inspections the CalRecycle or like the city needs to go do at each like grocery store or like campus or whatever to see how much food they're wasting. So they can also issue a notice of violation. So if they actually did do the inspection, they saw that they did it bad, and then they have 60 days to comply, and then the fine is the first fine will be a great total of $50 to $100. So if you're like a giant corporation, like that's not doing anything to you. So basically, there is not strong enforcement of this bill, but it's like a very good bill. It has a lot of potential. So now moving on to like the policy recommendations more specific.
Yeah, so for a little bit of context, California produces 5 to 6 million tons of food waste every single year, which is kind of insane. So basically about 2.5 billion meals worth of food gets discarded every year, while over 20% of Californians face food insecurity, so that's like a huge disparity right there. Some of the main causes of food waste is overconsumption at a consumer and commercial level, so people just buying too much food. There's also the issue of inadequate handling post-harvest, so if you don't refrigerate produce properly, for example, it's going to spoil. There's also consumer preferences, so consumers will tend to gravitate towards produce that's more visually appealing, and so if something doesn't fit like certain visual criteria, it usually won't even make it off the shelves. And then there's also the issue of sell-by dates on food. This is more for like prepared food, but they're very misleading, and consumers will often think that it means that food isn't safe to eat, or in some cases, stores are also just legally not allowed to sell it because of the sell-by date. And then also there's just a lack of a comprehensive food recovery plan, which we'll kind of go into later with our policy recommendations. But food waste has a tremendous environmental impact. So the decomposition of food waste is responsible for about 58% of methane emissions from landfills in the US. And also about 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is really significant because methane is about 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide, so it's really good at trapping heat. So it means that there's a lot of potential really by reducing food waste. There's a lot of potential to mitigate the climate crisis by addressing this issue.
So quickly, I wanted to add to our context with Common Vision. Common Vision is an org in West Oakland that I worked with over the past year. And they have a new program where they do food waste diversion. Well, I don't use the word waste because they take food that's edible, but it's like very close to its sell-by date, and they redistribute it to different elementary schools and high schools. And people in the community come in and take that food. And they were only really able to do this because the framework of SB 1383 was framed out. So then Good Eggs partnered with Common Vision, and they were able to start diverting the waste and redistributing the food. But my work with them also showed me that there are some hardships. For example, because this is a new program, they were kind of figuring things out on how to do what they want to do. Also, this bill relies on there being a nonprofit that's going to do this work. The Bay Area has a lot of nonprofits, but smaller cities don't have nonprofits that are willing or that have the capacity to do this work. Also, because this organization operates through a school, they told me that they're going to stop this like food distribution program during the summer because the schools aren't open and the people aren't getting paid to do work during the summer. So all that diversion kind of halts. So I guess the conclusion to this experience is it's a great starting point. SB 1383 has a lot of potential. It's just struggles in little logistics down the road.
So regarding the scope of our policy recommendation, we had considered both policy on the state level as well as more local city level, but after our own discussions as well as talking with a legislative aide who's worked on food waste legislation, we ultimately decided that policy on the state level would be the most effective way to address food waste. So this is primarily because the resources that exist at state level agencies like Cal Recycle would be really beneficial to implementing policy like SB 1383 all over the state of California. So state level agencies like Cal Recycle can help smaller local agencies with the actual implementation and enforcement of this legislation. So as we looked at the existing food waste legislation, we found a few things as previously stated that we wanted to improve on. So primarily making SB 1383 more enforceable, which would look like making the language of this bill more specific in the enforcement. And then one thing we had talked about were encouraging waste audits. So this would look like companies, grocery stores, restaurants actually conducting audits of the amount of food that they're wasting. So this would kind of expose to consumers what is happening in these companies, as well as be able to track if they're improving on their food waste. And then we finally decided on 4 different points for our policy recommendation. So first is mandatory enrollment. So that would be enrollment in like green waste collection. It wouldn't have to be a consumer opt-in, this would just be an automatic thing. And then monitoring and auditing hauler routes. So hauler routes are the paths that collection trucks take, so those would be monitored and audited. And then support for food recovery organizations would look like the development of sustainable funding models for more local food recovery organizations. So this would be especially beneficial for communities that might not have the resources to fund projects like food recovery projects long term, because this money would now come from some state organization. And then finally, public education and outreach would just be increased education, especially on waste sorting.
Okay, so here's some questions from the research that we were able to come up with. So the first question is, what are the main obstacles for enforcing SB 1383 at the local level? How can SB 1383 be amended to include stronger enforcement mechanisms? So, I mean, one of the biggest challenges with SB 1383 is that no one really knows what it is or what it requires. As mentioned before, the enforcement is like kind of weak. They have very vague rules, and the penalties are big, right? And what's it called? Stronger education efforts and clear information can help drive real change. And then for question 2, what role can public education campaigns play in improving SB 1383 outcomes? Local governments should require audits and progress reports from food waste generators, and this way, like, everyone can stay accountable for their own food waste. And then for number 3, how can SB 1383 be adapted to serve under-resourced communities? Raising public awareness about food waste and composting can go a long way. Schools can really play a bigger role in this and raise like awareness. And then number 4, how can our data with competition alter how the bill continues to function for programs? It's important to like.
Yeah. So this is just relating to the data we did with Common Vision. They have been keeping track of how much food waste that Good Eggs was wasting, and then how much they themselves have been able to divert. And there's a lot of other programs that Good Eggs works with, but we would be able to see how much Common Vision itself is able to divert. So how can building relationships with these type of organizations improve the effectiveness and potential pitfalls of SB 1383?
Well, for number 5, what role can state level policy play in standardizing enforcement of SB 1383 across diverse local governments? Well, the state should help the smaller cities and towns by providing them grants. And with the grants, they can find things like trucks or storage or staff training to get involved.
And then for question 6, what other partnerships can help with food recovery and protection in California? Well, they can do partnerships with nonprofits, universities, or food banks, and they can bring in new ideas and invest into more research with this stuff. And thank you.
It's still stuck the city Senate committee, specifically the Consumer Productions Committee. And as since we make the fashion industry, those that make over $100 million a year, I believe, to adopt this sustainability and greenhouse gas reduction. And so something that I found kind of interesting was that their bullet point only requires the disclosure information on the seller supply chains and not the company itself. So the company that is reporting this information can kind of make it look like they're actually making change, but in reality they're not, because they're being very selective of their information, hence making them look like they're sustainable, but they're not. So fashion companies again be selective, and they're only required a minimum of 50% of their supply chains to actually talk about.
So moving on to the Textile Recovery Act, and we have delved deeper into. So the Responsible Textile Recovery Act in 2024 was a first measurement that establishes California's extended producer responsibility program for textiles. And the actual legislation says that starting from July 1st, 2026, producers of clothing, footwear, and other textile products must join a producer responsibility organization, which that's approved by Kelp Recycle, I mentioned previously, for the food industry. So these PROs will manage the full life cycle of products from collection to recycling and reuse. And Kelp Recycle will finalize the regulation framework by July 2028, and the full program will go live by July 2030, which is still a long way to go. However, the law applies to a wide range of products, which is a first, meaning that shoes, handbags, towels, bedding, and more will be covered. And this will be exerted into some harsh punishment if there's lack of compliance. So the penalties will be up to 10,000 per day, or 50,000 if the violation is intentional.
And then for the Americas Act, it's one of those acts where there's a lot of components to it. So they have a lot of different segments, and one of the ones they have is specifically on reducing fast fashion. And some of the programs they have grants for are reducing fashion waste, so like how much is thrown into landfills, and then also fast fashion education. And then also ensuring that there's a balance with international clothing production and national, like domestic production. I guess this is the importance of the Americas Act, is to see the different ways that federal legislation can be created around fast fashion.
Okay, for some contextualization, the environmental impact of the fashion industry is massive globally, as it contributes to 8 to 10% of carbon emissions. Overproduction also leads to significant water waste and creates overwhelming amounts of unused garments that contribute to landfill waste. California has taken legislative steps to address this with laws like SB 62, which aims to regulate labor and encourages more sustainable fashion practices. But while these laws exist at the state level, they often fall short in practice because of limited enforcement. The core issue here is that state level action doesn't always translate into real changes on the ground, especially in an industry that's as fragmented and fast-paced as the fashion industry. That's why this policy memo focuses on California counties. Counties have several advantages. They're operationally capable, they're geographically close to manufacturers, and they're better positioned to ensure companies comply with existing laws. So in terms of scope, we're looking at a California-specific approach with county-level enforcement as the key strategy to close the gap between regulation and actual implementation. So again, why California? California is an ideal starting point for addressing overproduction for a few reasons. First, it's one of the largest fashion manufacturing hubs in the country, with LA serving as a central location for garment production. This makes California especially important when it comes to setting and enforcing industry standards. Second, the state has already demonstrated political will to tackle these issues in the industry through legislation like SB 62, which is a law that aims to protect garment workers and promote ethical manufacturing practices. However, again, its impact is limited due to poor enforcement at the local level. Which leads to the third point, overproduction and labor exploitation continues despite these efforts. And without strong enforcement mechanisms, the intent of the law doesn't always translate into action. California also has a really long history of strong environmental and labor policies, which makes it a logical leader for piloting these effective enforcement strategies. Lastly, counties in California have the infrastructure and proximity to manufacturers to carry out enforcement more effectively than state level agencies alone. So by focusing on California and specifically on empowering counties, we can close the gap between policy and practice.
So moving on to the actual policy recommendations, we do recommend that to have reduced tariffs for sustainable textile input, especially under the current context. So as we see from the previous legislations they introduced, California is the leader in sustainability, but our fashion sector still pays standard import tariffs in eco-friendly materials. That means brand sourcing organic cotton or recycled polyester pays a 10 to 15% import tax on top of already higher base costs. So this proposal calls for federal tariff exemption on certified sustainable textile inputs like GOTS, which is certified organic cotton, and recycled PET yarn, FSC certified lyocell, and industrial hemp. So it's targeted, simple, and impactful. With proper certifications, importers would qualify for a 0% tariff, and that lowers costs for local sustainable brands, levels the playing field, and helps shift the industry towards low impact materials. And California has already expressed international collaboration to address the current administration's adoption on tariff wars. California can lead on this by pushing for inclusion in the next federal miscellaneous tariff bill. And it's a practical step that supports jobs, innovation, and climate action without actually mandating behaviors of individual small businesses and incentivizing better choices.
Yeah, so that was our main one, but some other alternatives we had thought of were requiring transparency for what companies in California are selling and for retailers. So we see like how much, what their inventory is and what they're not selling, and we would maybe like not selling. We also thought of just a general tax on like fast fashion clothing in the US, but we just thought those were like more logistically challenging and would be like less fun.
And just quickly, some questions that we would focus on in the future is with policymakers aiming to reduce California's environmental policy power, what power does California policy have? What enforcement agencies would audit the unsold clothing and inventories? How can fashion policy be enforced in a way that makes overproduction more expensive than slow fashion practices? And what power would lowering the tariffs have during a federal increase in tariffs? That's it, thank you.
Questions? Good job, you guys. Did such an amazing job. I'm gonna take a picture of you.
Okay. Someone's on the Zoom, but I forgot to let it. Okay. Awesome. Great job, you guys. Alrighty.
Every time I see you in like the last 3-4 days. Alrighty. Great job, everyone. Let me just get to the place. Awesome. Thank you to everyone for attending our symposium. Yeah. Thank you again to the Cannabis Research Center for the collab and for and thank you to all our amazing committee leads, researchers, board members, everyone that made this happen today. Yeah, so proud of you all, and yeah, congrats! You've completed another semester of research. So proud of y'all, and yeah, I don't know. I've been in the club for like 3 years now, and it's just been so awesome to see all the amazing people that have grown from this, and it just makes my heart happy. And I'm like graduating, so I'm so sad to be leaving and like. All right, we're gonna do a couple activities and a couple announcements, so stick around for that. I'll do a couple of like announcements, like big ones, and then
If you want more food, grab some more food, and then we're gonna stick around for a little SURG activity. So if you're not part of SURG and you don't wanna like stick around for activity, no worries, I don't, yeah, real quick. Just wanna say, SURG members, if you want to be part of the leadership team next year or start your own research team, applications are out now for the committee lead applications, that's on Slack. And on last week's slide deck, so make sure to check that out. Applications for board are gonna be coming out soon, still finalizing some board member positions, but some, like a couple positions might be coming out in the coming weeks, so make sure to apply for that. And if you're interested in starting a research team, talk to us, talk to your committee lead, talk to anyone, we'll help you out with that, and next year's board leadership team will help you over the summer to create that. And speaking of board and leadership, we have an amazing, incredible announcement today. We have our next co-presidents for next year. Drum roll, please. Erin and Zoe. So we're so happy to have, they're like, one's back there, one's right here, but like, so excited to have you guys as presidents for next year. I don't know if you have anything else to say.
Yeah, and then we also have our other officers,
We haven't finalized, we haven't told them yet.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to get presents out first, but yeah, our next board members, y'all are gonna be finding out in the next week, trust. And then we'll also be recruiting from the rest of everyone else. So make sure to keep an eye out for that if you want an opportunity and a chance at leadership. Great opportunity, and I highly recommend. So definitely be on the lookout for either that Slack message or that email. It's gonna be coming. But yeah, thank you guys.
there's one thing that I wanted to announce before we go to superlatives.
Okay.
So this is for you actually.
Hello.
Because, you know, Nicole has been such a great co-president, and you know, she's graduating this semester. I'm really sad to say bye, but I brought, and you know, this is also for her too. We also got green flowers.
Thank you guys.
And then there's also a card. That I hope you guys can all sign for Nicole today by and just congratulate her for graduating. So
Thank you. Also, Lillian, where are you?
right here.
You're right there. That's like Lillian's also graduating, and I know that we're just so happy to have been part of such an amazing club. So yeah, thank you guys. What the heck?
And then yeah, maybe just this the card is up here if you guys want to sign that.
Thank you. Best co-pres ever, best club ever. Love you guys, and yeah, I'm so happy to be a part of such an amazing club. Can't wait for the next few years and next leadership and all that. So thank you guys. Yay. Alrighty, well, we can go into the activity, which is superlative. Woo! But we can also grab food too. So we can do either one.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to go grab food right now and then sit to watch like
the superlatives.
Oh,
Oh, and Payne has
Oh, I was just gonna say, yes, grab food, because after you grab food, I'm gonna just kind of help clean up a bit.
Thank you.
And then also for folks who like for recycling or production, you can call up the center, which is a nonprofit here, very big. I think there's still currently trying for recycling and food coordinator, so if anybody's a senior and graduating audience, maybe it's just y'all. If y'all are interested in, you know, ways. They're hiring and they're actually working on it.